Quick audio check. Quick audio check. Alrighty. Up and operational. Always have to check that, and today I forgot to turn the audio on. So, welcome to NycosRPG and the Game Master Soapbox. I am your host, Jonathan Albin, also known as Game Master J, and I'm also known in the world of tanks arena as Commander Clueless. I just recently started posting videos about that as well, and that caused some confusion, so I actually had a couple of my episodes for this actually end up in the World of Tanks channel, and I had to fix that. So apologize for that if you missed me. So today we have a series of subjects we want to talk about, and they're posted here on the board as always. And if you notice, there's a bit of a theme today, and that is I want to talk about role-playing, perhaps in a way that you haven't thought of it or heard of it before. And in particular, I want to talk about role-playing through other elements. So role-playing in card games, role-playing in board and tabletop games, role-playing miniatures games, role-playing as what it legitimately is, role-playing, and more on that when we get there. Then, of course, the rant today is going to be on cheating, and I have a bunch to say about that. So I'm pretty sure I'll probably go over, and I don't know how to use my cough button yet. So when I get to that point, we'll get to a lot more professional videos at that point, I suppose. And then finally, I want to talk about a new show I want to do, and I'm going to be asking for people to send me basically their video and a bit of audio about what they would like to do if they were able to be a participant in a live stream version of Roleplay Roulette. The concept will be that the players will still be playing roleplay games, but it will be literally a virtual rotisserie, if you will, a rotating stock of possible settings that we will roleplay in. And I've done it as a teaching mechanism, and it's great for teaching new people how to play. But in this case, I would like to set up, and I'd like to have participants audition to be a part of the Roleplay Roulette live stream. And I literally intend for the players to rotate as much as the stories. So don't feel that if you send me an audition tape that either A, you're going to be bound to a long deal, or that B, you're going to have to be of a really ultra high caliber to be on the show. And it is intended to kind of showcase not only the role play roulette mechanism and the cleverness of the cast, but mainly the idea that things can change and the stories will stay enjoyable, entertaining, and fun regardless of the setting. I'll come back and do a lot more on that when we get to the end. But before we get going, we are going to be talking first about the topics in the orders that I have here. So let's get ready to go, shall we? Role-playing card games. Now that sounds funny, and I know there was a product that was put out some probably decades ago now by a fledgling little company you might have heard of called Wizards of the Coast, wherein they used playing cards as the mechanism for decision making in a role-play game and to determine the outcomes of conflicts and such. And unfortunately, despite a very nice looking product and a innovation that hadn't been pursued, it didn't do very well in the marketplace. And to the point is that I don't even remember the name of the property, but I do know that it was Wizards of the Coast, for one of their very first products, put out by Richard Garfield and Peter Atkinson and the team. But what I'm speaking of when I speak of role-playing is that when we are playful people and we are going to play a card game, we can bring with it the concept of role-playing. For example, I don't know how many of you have played there's a game that was called Mille-Borne. And Mille-Borne was, that term is a French term, and it equates to 1,000 miles or 1,000 kilometers, or it's a long travel game, and you are playing race drivers basically in a Le Mans kind of racing mechanism over long distances where you have to refuel and take on tires and worry about mechanical problems and such. And it's fast paced, and it was really early, and it's I believe it was produced by some of the big boys, either Parker Brothers or it might have even been Mattel or Hasbro, but I'm not sure which one. But Mille-Borne was a game that you were playing a race, and sure, it's easy to just play the game and mechanically worry about your fuel or whatever. But it was a lot more fun when we played to take on the role of a race driver and talk about the action of, oh hey, I get to play a 200-mile card, or instead of just saying, oh, I play the card, it was over the last, we raced ahead, we've had improvements in our car, and we were able to move really fast in that section, and we moved to 200 miles or whatever. And of course, you were messing with other players as you went along, so cards you played would interfere with their ability. So, oh yeah, I left some nails on the road, and yes, it caused a problem with your tires. And there's nothing on the card that says nails; it just says flat tire. So you were role playing the process. For me, there's a bunch of reasons to do this. One of which is a card game being a two-dimensional thing. Literally, the cards are paper, if you will. They're cardstock. The cards are not the game. The game is the engagement with each other using the cards. Even the big properties like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic the Gathering, or Lord of the Rings, or even a million other deck building games, card building games, hand building games. There's all these different mechanics now, so it's hard to define them. But any game that uses card stock, the story of the game can be so much richer than just the flat what's in the box. What's in the box? So, therefore, I advocate for role playing in your card games, because you are adding a dimension to the property, even if it's a simple card game. For example, and I'd say simple, but there are people who would argue with me all day long about it, but poker or other gambling games, and I don't advocate for gambling as a structure. My father was a not quite a reprobate, but he played a lot of gambling games and wasn't very successful. But the concept, even when you're playing, 1,000 different card games out there, when you are playing to be a wheeler dealer, you take on a persona. And so even in games like poker, even if it's a social game and you're not playing for points, you're only using chips or whatever, the mechanic of playing that, you can take on the role of the wheeler dealer. You can change the way you play to match the persona that you take on when you decide to play that game. So, for example, I particularly like the rules to Texas Hold'em, because it seems to drive more communication between the players, and it depends more on the interaction and the awareness of the other players than it does the cards that are in your hand. The concept is that you take on a role and you play that role when you're involved in that particular property. So card games being two-dimensional, it's almost essential to have something deeper that you're doing as you're playing that game. I have my grandmother and grandfather were very instrumental in my involvement in card games when I was a young. As a matter of fact, my earliest remembrances of going to my grandmother's was sitting, looking over the card table, and trying to get to see what was going on, because the games were fascinating. Not just because the cards and the interaction in a game like, for example, cribbage or canasta, even though that's the actual mechanics of the game are interesting, it was actually far more enjoyable to watch how in my family's background, they interacted through the games that they played. And so by focusing on that element and getting used to thinking about the way people play, you could even take on personas, if you will, within a standard card game. So now we're going to switch gears. Role playing is also essential and arguably just as strongly, maybe not quite as much, but and sometimes it's even built in to board games and tabletop games of non-board relation. So for example, when I say the term board games, I'm also usually including games like Carcassonne or Settlers of Catan, wherein you're using cards and tiles, not actual physical board, not just the roll your dice, move your mice kind of games. But when you are playing, for example, even in Monopoly, you take on a persona. You think about it from the standpoint of, am I going to be the oil magnate who's going to worry about owning the train stations, or am I going to be trying to advocate for owning the major hotels on the major locations and kind of shine the lower cost values? Or am I going to be like the slumlord and I'm going to take those smaller values and just own enough of them to make up the difference than compared to the other competitive strategies? And if you play the game with that strategy, why not take on sort of that persona and commentary during a game, which normally doesn't have any effect on the game directly, does tend to have an effect on the other players, because if you're playing up the fact that you own 60% of the property on the two low ends of the board and you're pushing to own 80%, you're giving the ambiance or the feeling that you're kind of a slumlord. You're only dealing with the rank and file. But if you role play that, hey, I'm a landholder and you need to visit while you come by every time anyway, so feel free to make an extra payment because that's just the way it goes because I own enough properties or whatever. The element of role play, therefore, that comes out adds to the experience and may actually improve your thought processes if you think in those kind of terms as you're playing. When you talk about board games, obviously a game like Settlers of Catan is a cooperative game. You're actually working with the other players throughout to achieve the goal of reaching the points. But if you are, talking about things from the standpoint of being a neighbor, and I happen to go that direction because good walls make good neighbors, and I hope you don't mind, and you're polite, and all of those things that go into being an established landholder, you actually are amplifying the fun of that game. You're giving it a deeper life. Games like King of Tokyo or any of the me versus you kind of games that are out there in the environment are also great for taking on this concept of role playing in the game. And I think you're going to see the kind of a theme to the conversation here, and when I get to the key critical part, I think it'll be like a no-brainer. But with the board games in particular, many of them have the role playing built into them. For example, in Monopoly, even if you've never thought of yourself as a role player, somebody is appointed to be the banker, right? His role in the game is to mete out the money, collect the penalties, make sure the board is kept straight as far as where the money is supposed to be there, and in general, be an overseer. And the concept of taking on a personality or playing that role to a deeper level enhances the play experience for everybody else at the table. And imagine if you had a table full of people who were role playing their various strategies, their tactics. Then the experience with the other players, obvious, like, for example, things on deciding who you will trade with could actually become part of what you've chosen to be the what seems to be arbitrary, but the intentional role you've taken on in the game. So with board and tabletop games, much of the role play aspects are actually built into it. A huge example of that is in the case of the game Clue. Yes, Mr. Body is dead and everybody is worried about who caused the crime. And we're all detectives. Well, if you take on the concept of a detective, you wear a funny hat and you carry around a prop like a smoking pipe or something to represent that you're Sherlock Holmes, or you brought your knitting if you're Mrs. Marple or whatever. When you take on the role play aspects, as a matter of fact, one of the things we used to do as a great example of this was in the game Risk, which has there's no culture built into it at all. You're just playing nations on a board, and where you start at is fundamentally arbitrary. Yes, there are versions where you can pick your starting points and such, but even if you have some effect there, that leads to a different kind of a persona that you might take on when you're playing. So, for example, when we played the game Risk, before we played, I would pull out from my huge hat collection a ton of different hats, and then each player would take a different hat and wear it, and then suddenly they were whatever that personality was. Now, some of them today wouldn't be as acceptable because they were today you would call it cultural appropriation. For example, I've got I had at one point I had a sombrero and a cowboy hat and a rebel's cap and a coonskin cap and a raccoon skin, that is. These hats would carry with them archetypical, at the point, humor, and then the play of that character would take on the persona or the personality that the hat was representing, and it made the game a lot more fun. One of the things we always did is, I'm a fan of the old funny papers. Newspapers used to, every week, and I'm sure that some of them still do, have a full color comic section on Sundays, and we would fold a paper hat that was akin to the large, tall hat that religious leaders would wear. We called it lovingly a pope hat, and so of course the humor of it being out of funny papers made it somewhat of a farce. And really, that's what I'm talking about. Is you bring farcical nature to a game. Now, a lot of the things that I'm talking about here in terms of abstractly changing the environment of the game to add role play is would fall into last week's conversation about benefit of the doubt. We were only doing it out of fun, and there are people that may be concerned, and if so, please leave your comments. I'm glad to read them, and I will respond to them in kind. And by the way, if you like what you're hearing, make sure you like this episode, follow the show on Twitch, and make sure you also subscribe to the channel so you make sure you get all the updates, and to allow the algorithm to know that, so we can get this video in front of more people. And so board games are just as essentially role-playing environments or role-playing opportunities. And I think, like I said, you're going to see the trend here in a minute. Now, when you're talking about a miniatures game, most miniatures games already have built into the miniatures pieces a theme, a flavor, a concept. If you are playing a miniatures game, pardon my eye itch just happens sometimes. If you are playing a game that is set in the era of the Napoleonic Wars, well, definitely you're going to be playing the French or the English or the Germans or the Russians or whatever culture your army is, and speaking with a silly accent or trying to play act while you're actually moving your miniatures is a way to enact that role-playing aspect. one of the clearest examples of this is in the Warhammer 40K environment, wherein the different species have speech patterns that are presented in their advertising and their marketing. Even in their actual text, there's the pidgin form of English, for example, that the orcs use, and speaking with that accent, and thrusting out your lower jaw as if you had tusks as you're speaking. These elements make the game experience with the other players arguably more lively. Now, some, as I said, some would look at that and say, "No, you're being silly. This is just a very serious historical battle, Battle of D-Day or Battle of the Ardennes or whatever the historical period, and maybe you're playing the German side and you don't necessarily want to take on that persona." Well, even without that, the personality of your command might be represented. Maybe you're playing as using the strategies and tactics of George Patton, or maybe you are playing your mechanized units as if you were Montgomery, or you could, the point here is that the miniatures games lend themselves, and in many cases are fundamentally an abstract version of a role-playing game. And even in classic role-playing games, there are miniatures involved. For example, the Dungeons and Dragons for a long time had a battle system that you used for playing out the larger scale conflicts, including ranking battles against ranks and files of soldiers up against dragons and other beasties. And the role play is fundamentally part of, if not essential to, miniatures games. And again, with the hats, playing a miniatures game, I had at one point 57 different hats. I think I've got maybe 20 now. I had a personal fire a couple of years ago that wiped out my collection, but it wiped out more than just that, but that's a completely separate story. But the idea is that the wearing of something, an emblem, a t-shirt, maybe a patch, that represents the group, clan, background, unit, whatever that you are participating as, will enrich the role-playing experience and enrich the game's experience. In the case of miniatures, the moves you make will make sense if you are, for example, you're playing the orcs and you decide that a unit is going to run away, even though they don't strategically need to, because in story, in your head, it makes sense for them to go running or whatever. Then that justification in game can be brought out through the role-play mechanics as well as the actual mechanics. So it doesn't take any rules to do any of these. Of course, we're talking about role-playing as just play, and that brings us to the next part. Role-playing is just play. We all had childhoods, and I guarantee all of you had one. You may not remember it. You probably have to go look in your yearbook to see that. Yeah, there was a time when you were a child. My father thought mine was too long, and my son acknowledges that I never did grow up. But the concept of playing with other folk is a positive thing, and is in some cases even considered to be a derogatory term. Now, I have to say, I know that those of you that are in now or have been in the dating scene, you've seen all of the people post their likes and dislikes, and almost all of them will say, no players. Don't call me if you're a player. And I think that's really kind of sad, because that play is not what we're talking about here. It's not the idea of being disingenuous. It's not being obfuscating. Instead, it's amplifying the experience by feeling more than just what the game mechanics regardless of the system, provide us. I request that if you have any questions or concerns about any of these, that you please post a response to this now and ask your friends, share this video, and get other people's opinions on this. But it makes me sad when I think that when we say somebody is a player, we automatically mean that they are dishonest and behave badly, because playing is important. As a matter of fact, when we were younger, one of the big things that was a concern was sportsman-like conduct. But if you look at the sportsmen and sportswomen and sports persons that we have in the world today, there are a myriad of accusations about infidelity, in cheating, in dishonesty, for example, drug doping, and changing your physique in order to improve your chances of winning is egregious, and it's awful. And I just want to clarify that, to me, the concept of being a role player simply means that you're playful in everything, that you take on a childlike attitude and associate the stuff that you're doing with the being in that role. If nothing else, it gives us an opportunity to think, consider, decide on what other things and other people have had to put up with, or that they do, because we're playing in that role. Now, regardless of the mechanic system that you use, role-playing actually is its own thing. And with close to 50 years of experience as a storyteller and a game master, I have administered games in hundreds of games systems. And while each individual system is interesting and challenging and sometimes confusing, nonetheless, the mechanical portion of the game is separate from the role play of it, because there is not a quantifiable way to measure success or failure in role playing other than the simple question of whether you're having a good time or not. If the role playing is not adding or enhancing the game session, then you're not role playing by classic definition, because you're not playing a role. You're not fulfilling that position within the team or whatever. And so we have to look at role playing and realize that it is playing. It's no different than when we were kids in the playground and somebody would say, hey, let's play astronauts, and one person would say, well, I want to be Houston Control, and another person says, well, I want to be the command module captain, and somebody else says, well, I want to be on the lunar lander. And in the conversation that was the game, you would define the physical things you saw around you in terms of the game. I remember in particular there was a roundish jungle gym set that for us was the lunar lander. And the people who were playing that role would climb up on the top of it and would shout their commands and instructions, and then other players would respond with, maybe they were the fueling crew, or maybe they were taking care of whatever. Their role was different. And when you played, everyone was in that scene. You weren't any longer in your playground. You were on the launch pad at Canaveral, or you were at the landing site at Tranquility, or you were splashing down in the ocean. This was the real world was being played out on playgrounds all the time, and we have somewhat lost that ability. And so all I'm recommending is that if you'll notice from all of these, the advocation for role playing is simply play with the games. Don't use them as a I win versus you win kind of thing. And that will bring me up to the point of my rant. Okay, so as usual, I check the clock and make sure I'm coming up on an even minute, because The rants usually tend to run long, and I want to try to keep it to its limit. All right, here we go. Jim Rome, I believe, he's a sports personality. He does sports casting and interactions, interviews, and such. At one point on the air, and I couldn't even tell you, but it was in the Los Angeles market, and it was probably 2 decades ago, thereabouts. They were talking with Jim, and they were discussing the problems that go on behind the scenes of the sports environment. And he said, if a player is participating in a sport and is not involved in cheating, then they aren't trying hard enough. The concept of cheating, to me, undermines the very reasons for being a participant in a game. If you have to circumvent the mechanics by breaking the rules, then you are fundamentally depriving yourself of the fun of whatever that game is. Now, when we are talking about sports as games, and they are, or we're talking about competitive games where there is a cash or material prize, such as the trading card games, collectible card games, and even, shall I say, professional gaming as defined by the Nevada Council on Gaming or whatever. If you are involved with any of those, there is a functional reason why an advantage in that game is seen as a cheat. For most blatant example is in a poker or blackjack game where you're actually counting the number of cards that pass by of a certain rank to determine your likelihood of winning on the macro scale of the size of a deck of cards, then that is not a violation of the rule. There is no rule in the game that says you cannot track data. As a matter of fact, I would say that the entire function of our world, based on big data and large number mathematics, fundamentally comes down to it's not illegal, and if it happens to provide trending information and tools for advancement, then that's not considered to be cheating. And so I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is simple things, like, for example, in Magic the Gathering and the competitive level, there were situations, and I'm not going to go into the individuals, I'm not in that marketplace any longer, and even when I wasn't involved with the adjudication process. But it seems that the people who attempt to play those games professionally, which is to generate revenue from them, were almost constantly either cheating or being accused of cheating or finding ways to leverage the rules to give them an undue advantage. An undue advantage is different from a due advantage in that, for example, the concept of counting cards. If you are playing, for example, you're playing a game of Magic, and you know the rule is a person can only have 4 copies of a specific card, and you happen to be playing and you notice that you've counted 5, your opponent has taken an undue advantage by breaking the rule of only 4 and playing with the 5th copy of whatever the card is. That's cheating. That's what I mean. That is an undue advantage. If, on the other hand, you are reading the number of cards that go by and you realize that he has used up all 4 of his counter spells, or has placed out all of his big monsters and you've been able to exile them or whatever, and therefore he hasn't got anything left. That's not an undue advantage. That's just simply being astute and paying attention to the game. So, cheating here, I'm talking about the overt and the unreasonable. And if you're a game player, or if you're a game master, I know you know what I'm talking about. And I'm not going to name any names, but I have had players in just about every campaign, long scale game that I've ever run. I have had players who, for whatever reason, felt compelled to cheat. Even in a role playing game, which arguably, since there is no winner and no loser, there's no real reason to have to cheat. Nonetheless, you will find them people that will. Now, I'm going to take a moment in this conversation to talk about something I said a couple weeks ago, and it's still bugging me. And the guy that posted the comment, I'm sure he's gone on and has no longer responded to the channel in any kind of way. But I said during a game that I manipulated the stories, and that doesn't mean that I manipulated the mechanics. I didn't adjust the rules to disadvantage the players at any time. If, in fact, arguably, if I did any disadvantaging, I would have done it against the enemies of the players, because the story to me is greater than the sum of the individual player actions. But I just want to clarify that the manipulation or the adjustments that a game master makes in a role-play game, if he wants the game to be enjoyable to his players, isn't the concept here of cheating. I'm speaking of, for example, let's say you have a fighter in your group who is lower level, and the fighter in the group requires say a 12 on a 20-sided dice to hit. Well, that means about, with all of the modifiers, it's going to be about 60 to 80% of the time he's going to succeed. And yet, those same people who are depending on the game to be exciting and dynamic will intentionally alter or misread or intentionally redefine the die roll they make. And I think, this is just my thought process here, I think that the dynamic that causes that is quite a bit of the hero complex that's almost mandated by a role-play environment, because you're wanting to always be the winner. You always want to be the one who succeeds. But for there to be give and take, and there to be balance in the game mechanism, cheating for that cause only harms you as a player. Because yes, let's say your, again, fighter rolls poorly. Looking down at the dice, you quickly grab the dice and tell the game master that the number was higher than it was. Now, you've made a success, but the game master expected 60% of the time you're going to succeed anyway. So he's not going to notice once in a while. And this can be done by accident sometimes even. So I'm really not even talking about that. I'm talking about the overt and intentional cheating. Because what that cheating does is it takes away the dynamic of the game, and it deprives the player of the experience of overcoming a failure. And I know that in our culture today, you want to educate children so that they don't think about winning or losing. But the reality is that in life, in all things, there are wins and there are losses. And I could go very poignant and talk about my own positions of great loss in my life, but I'm not going to do that. But what I am going to say is that the times in my life that have been the greatest have been when I have overcome an adversity and come back from the brink of bad conditions. So the very reason to be a cheater in any game, but in particular role-play games, is only detrimental to you, the player. Now, again, when there's objective awards on the line and all of that, there is at least some cultural thought that I'm going to win by any means, but that is not really even fair to you, because it is giving you something for which you will always have that marred reality behind it. One of my favorite movies is called Cool Runnings, and in that John Candy plays a disgraced bobsled coach who at one point did cheat in the Olympics in order to try to win the gold. And one of his responses, because he did get caught and he had to deal with the ramifications of his improper behavior, the line that he says is, if you're not good enough without the trophy, you'll never be good enough with it. And the point is that if you have gone through the effort and you've made the decision to play in the game and actually put your character on the line, your items on the line, go ahead and run that risk, because the successes will be much more enriching than the occasional failures that are a part of the machine. That is part of what life is. Life isn't fair. There aren't things that fix all situations in the actual participating in them. You are going to, your car is going to break down at some point. You're going to forget to buy gas and you're going to be short. Your relatives are not going to appreciate you at some point or whatever. All of these things are the reality of life, and the challenge is that we should keep ourselves above this concept of falsification of results, so that we can appreciate the places where the resolution truly is in our favor. And I've gone 2 minutes over, so as Forrest Gump would say, that's all I got to say about that for now. Oh, and I wanted to show off my fine 3D printed cup. It's going to vanish. It did vanish. A friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, made this for me some time ago, and I try to show it in at least once in a while in videos that I do. Just the perfect size for holding a can of soda, therefore cloaking the brand so I can show it on screen and not have to worry about running into payment for fees or whatever, advertising, whatever. All right, so now we're going to take a little bit here at the end, and we're going to talk about the concept of live streaming roleplay roulette. I do operate a Discord channel that I will be using for the audio portion, and the participants will need to have a camera and a microphone, and either an earbud situation like I have, or a microphone and headphones, or a microphone and external speakers that don't give feedback in order to participate. I'm going to request that if you're going to do this, send me a message either through the chat or by direct message to my email address, which is gamemarketguru@gmail.com. I'll probably say that a dozen more times, but gamemarketguru@gmail.com, and send me a video recording of yourself, just 2 or 3 minutes. It doesn't even have to be anything in particular, it's just a matter of carriage and presentation and visual quality of the camera and such. But I will be choosing up to 8 players for the roleplay roulette mechanism when we go the live stream direction. I will I will admit that I will give you preferential treatment if you are on my you are a supporter of my program through PayPal, simply because then you will have contributed to the effort. There will not be this is not going to be a for pay situation, because the only thing we're creating is quality videos and all of that. This isn't about creating a brand, at least not yet. And of course, that conversation will come up over time. But there isn't going to be a particular compensation for the roles, so this is not a hiring mechanism, but simply if you want to be a part of the process, feel free to send me a video of yourself and a couple lines of speaking. Also, give me a resume of your play history in terms of what genres and types of games you played. I'm not particularly needing to know the game mechanism that you are playing under, because we will be playing the roleplay roulette does not have a mechanism per se, and I'll go more into that as we go along. But also include, like I said, the genres of stories that you would like to be a part of, so that I get an idea of how widely varied your experience is and what you would like to participate in. And of course, this process will be ongoing, so I'll mention it from time to time. But this original request is in this video only, so I'd ask that if you have someone else that you know that is a role play aficionado that would like to be involved with a live stream program here on Twitch, in particular on NycosRPG, to reach out to me so that I can and make sure they get a copy of the video. So share it with your friends, and I'm going to be putting this video out on other resources as well. Specifically, I will clip this last bit about the live stream and make a separate video calling out on this, so that we can get this information out to as many people as possible. It doesn't matter to me what time zone you live in. It doesn't matter to me what part of the country you live in. It doesn't matter to me anything about your background other than your roleplay experience and your roleplay desire. If you are a character actor and a TV personality already, that would be a bonus for the channel, but it is not something that I am requiring, nor is it something that I'm particularly going to be filtering either in or out. So just realize, if you've got a background in theater but you don't have actual role-playing experience, let me know what kind of role-playing experience you would like to have, and we can build towards that as well, because this is going to be somewhat of a collaborative process, and the promotion of this is only for what will always be free is the roleplay roulette mechanism. You'll always be able to play and participate in roleplay roulette without there being a package you have to buy, anything like that. It's never, I intend for roleplay roulette because it is the core of roleplay, which is just playing. We're just going to be playing. So that's, I'm running way over on my time again. I tend to do that when I get excited. So again, if you are a game master and want to know more about how you can use roleplay roulette in your local community games, or if you want to learn how to do it for your own live stream experiment and such, like the ones that I'm doing, make sure you reach out to me and leave a message here. Again, if you like what you're seeing on the show here today, make sure you follow the channel, subscribe, become a member of the team, and if you want more information, go to Nykos on Patreon. So it's patreon.com/Nykos, Nykos, like it's spelled up here. And you'll get more information, and if you participate in that at the $20 value or higher, then you'll already have access to the Discord channel, and we can start to have conversations about what this live stream roleplay roulette is going to look like. So thank you again for participating. Thank you again for watching. If you have the opportunity to, please follow the channel, like this program, and share it with your friends to let others know about this opportunity, and really let them know that we all should be getting out there and playing more. So in the great words of my grandfather, go play. Thanks everybody. See you next week. Or see you tomorrow, actually. I'm doing these way too often.